So thank you again for taking the time to join us this evening. This is our 10th listening session, and we have really been learning so much from all of these sessions. Our agenda for our time together is split between a CARB presentation and then opportunities to hear from all of you. The presentation includes the same information we've shared at our last workshop and at our previous listening sessions. Its purpose is to provide the nuts and bolts of the potential regulation and highlight what we see as the benefits, opportunities, and challenges associated with the regulation. We also want to share where we are in the rulemaking process. We will then pause to hear clarifying questions and then facilitate a structured listening session based on questions that CARB staff have prepared. There will also be an opportunity to continue the discussion in smaller breakout groups. We really want to hear your experiences, hopes, concerns, and ideas about how to make the regulation better and how to make it better designed or implemented. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A feature. We will not accept verbal questions during the clarifying Q&A pause, so please just make sure you submit those questions using the Q&A feature in writing via Zoom. So first, some background on the California Air Resources Board. CARB is part of the California Environmental Protection Agency, and our mission is to promote health, welfare, and ecological resources through the effective reduction of air pollutants. You might have heard about some of our other regulations. Many of them are related to vehicle emissions, though CARB also regulates other sectors, including toxics, locomotives, and port and harbor emissions. And we also work with the air districts to meet health-based air quality standards. In 2006, CARB became the lead agency for climate change policy and planning in California. We're targeting heating equipment for a few key reasons. First, the direct emissions from polluting space and water heaters are responsible for about 8% of total statewide climate pollutants, which presents a real opportunity to reduce a significant amount of California's greenhouse gas emissions. Second, space and water heaters also emit air pollutants such as nitrogen oxides, NOx, and particulate matter, which worsen local air quality and impact public health. 2 California air districts have already adopted or proposed zero NOx rules for space and water heating equipment to improve their local air quality and reduce rates of respiratory and heart disease. We see our regulation as complementary to these local rules. Third, heat pumps used for space heating increase access to cooling in homes and businesses that previously didn't have air conditioning, because heat pumps can both heat and cool spaces. This increased added cooling will be important during more frequent and more extreme heat events that our state sees. And lastly, the regulation would also provide a market signal by providing certainty and statewide consistency to manufacturers, consumers, and contractors, which can help to drive innovation and market adoption. CARB's current proposal would require that all new space and water heating equipment sold in California emit no greenhouse gases. As a point of sale requirement, that means folks can continue using, maintaining, and repairing their current space and water heating equipment until its end of life. Once it comes time to replace the equipment, and if the regulation is in effect at the time of replacement, the only new equipment that would be available for sale would be zero-emission equipment. Staff envision the regulation to focus on regulating and potentially enforcing at the manufacturer, distributor, and retailer level, and not focusing on compliance at the level of individual residents, small businesses, or building owners. So now on to the details of our proposed regulation. An important element of the regulatory design is defining the equipment that's going to be regulated. For water heating, CARB is considering boilers and water heaters, instantaneous water heaters, which are also called on-demand or always-on water heaters, high-temperature boilers and water heaters, which are typically found in commercial applications like dry cleaners, and pool and spa heaters. For space heating, we are considering furnaces. These different types of equipment are then broken down into size categories, with smaller sized equipment typically serving smaller buildings. For example, we plan to regulate water heaters and boilers that are less than 75 kBTUs per hour, which are typically storage water heaters about 20 to 100 gallons that you'd find in single-family homes or small businesses, or used as in-unit water heaters in an apartment unit. There are 3 size buckets for water heaters and boilers that fall under the regulation. And boilers with the largest regulated equipment being boilers and water heaters less than or equal to 2 million BTUs per hour. Instantaneous water heaters are split between 2 large and small categories as well, as shown here. The more complex, specialized, high-temperature water heaters are all considered under one size, which is under 2 million BTUs per hour. Pool heaters are also included, and the threshold we've set here, less than or equal to 2 million BTUs per hour, includes most of the residential and commercial pool, spa, and hot tub heaters out there. For space heating, CARB is considering 2 size thresholds for furnaces, ones that are less than 175 kBTUs per hour and ones that are less than or equal to 2 million BTUs per hour. The smaller capacity bucket will include mostly residential or small commercial space heating equipment like floor or wall furnaces and central furnaces that you'd find in homes and buildings under 3,000 square feet. The larger furnaces are typically used for large residential, multifamily, or commercial buildings. The reason for considering equipment between different end uses and across different thresholds has to do with how soon we estimate this equipment to be readily available at a reasonable cost and with a suitable variety of options. We've also tried to align our dates as closely as possible with South Coast and Bay Area, 2 large air districts with proposed or adopted zero NOx rules, to provide statewide consistency, as much of the same equipment will be regulated under our regulation and their rules. CARB's proposed staggered compliance dates are presented in this table. As you can see, the earliest compliance date is 2027 for the smaller water heaters, with the more specialized high-temperature water heaters having the latest compliance date in 2033. The chart of equipment types based on BTUs per hour can be hard to visualize. This slide here is to help show the equipment CARB plans to regulate. On the left side are images of equipment types that emit climate pollutants, like wall furnaces or natural gas tanked water heaters, often found in homes or businesses. This regulation is technology neutral, although we've added a few examples of zero-emission appliances on the right side. There are different zero-emission technologies available now, including electric resistance appliances, heat pumps, and solar appliances. Fuel cell-based equipment is another potential option that may be available in the future. CARB staff anticipates that, for the most part, heat pumps will replace the polluting appliances. They are nearly 4 times more energy efficient than the conventional equipment. Heat pumps are also available today for a variety of space and water heating applications. There's a lot of promising innovation in heat pump technologies that can meet a variety of needs across California. There are heat pumps that work in both ducted and ductless heating systems. There are heat pumps specifically designed to work in cold climates all the way down to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And also encouraging is the development of the 120-volt heat pump water heater, which reduces the need for upsizing the electric panel because it utilizes a standard electric outlet compared to most heat pump water heaters, which require a 240-volt circuit. We are still developing the regulation and plan to take our proposal to the board for consideration in 2025, with a final rule in 2026. While our public workshops are still our main venue for sharing new information and hearing public comment, we are also in the midst of our public engagement work, which includes listening sessions just like this one. This slide illustrates some typical questions that might arise on the journey to replacing a space or your space or water heating equipment. Questions such as, how much does the equipment cost? Can I find a knowledgeable contractor? Will I need any retrofits to install zero-emission equipment? Is my local energy distribution system ready? Will my energy bills change? If you have any other questions that you think are missing from this slide, please let us know. This picture looks different for renters, people both renting a home or renting a space for a business, where landlords are the ones responsible for ensuring adequate space and water heating, and where many renters are already cost burdened. These common questions, the challenges they represent, and some of the possibilities available to address them today have all been reiterated throughout the listening sessions we've attended thus far. We're here to learn from your experiences and also to learn about what would be most helpful for you and others in California as we consider moving forward with this regulation. The next few slides highlight these questions. Zero-emission equipment is still often more expensive at purchase than air-polluting equipment. Fortunately, there are many programs encouraging people to adopt zero-emission equipment, many of them through incentives and rebates. So just to highlight a few that are listed here, the TECH program offers initiatives for heat pump water heaters and space heaters with a higher amount for low-income households. The incentives are focused on investor-owned utility territories. The Equitable Building CARB program, which targets low-income households and households in disadvantaged communities, includes zero-emission heat pump installation and covers the cost of pre-decarbonization retrofit needs, such as panel upgrades, as well as including remediation for mold, lead, asbestos, and other healthy home needs. The California Energy Commission recently announced their program administrators, so these funds should be rolling out soon. In Northern California, the administrator is the Association for Energy Affordability. Investor-owned and publicly owned utilities, regional energy networks, and municipalities also offer programs, incentives, and rebates. A few of the regional programs available in Northern California, like the LIFT program from MCE, and rebate programs from Reading Electric Utility, Sonoma Clean Power, Trinity PUD, Bay Ren, SMUD, BACMed are all listed here. A really helpful resource is the Switches On Incentive Finder, where you can plug in your zip code and then see a list of incentives that are available in your area. We've also heard that it can be really challenging to find contractors who are knowledgeable about installing zero-emission equipment. Although technologies like heat pumps for heating are quite common in other parts of the country, they're still under 10% of installed heating equipment here in California. The TECH program is one example of a statewide incentive program that's focused on expanding and supporting contractors, and many regional energy networks, or RENs, are also working on workforce development and offering trainings. The Clean Energy Connection provides a database of contractors so the public can know how to access qualified and knowledgeable contractors. Some buildings that don't currently have zero-emission space and water heating may need changes to accommodate new equipment. This might mean changing the equipment location or adding ventilation by installing louver doors on an existing water heater closet. If a zero-emission heater uses electricity, the electric service panel might need upsizing if it's smaller than 100 amps. If someone's not expecting their equipment to fail, getting a replacement could be delayed until these retrofits happen. Some possibilities for addressing these issues include using low voltage and portable equipment options that could be a temporary or even permanent solution for buildings without sufficient space or needing increased electric service capacity. There are also loaner or rental programs for non-zero emission equipment or 120-volt heat pump water heaters that can be used until necessary retrofits can happen. Devices like smart service panels can help make the most of lower service panel capacity by managing the amount of power demanded by appliances in the house at any given time. If you need to increase the size of your electric service panel to install zero-emission equipment, there's also a utility side to this upsizing, which can come with significant cost and delay. Good news is that the CPUC staff recently proposed lower cost utility service upgrades for low-income households. This would apply to CPUC jurisdiction utilities, including PG&E, but not other publicly owned utilities. Some areas of the state also experience frequent or prolonged outages, which can be especially hazardous in the winter. Again, the CPUC is also working to reduce time to prepare distribution infrastructure to connect more energy resources and energy loads to the grid. During the discussion, we welcome any experiences you've had with distribution grid issues, outages, and any opportunities you've seen for addressing these potential challenges. Another key question you might be wondering is if and how your energy bills will change. Time of use rates, which are now default for most Californians, are based on the time you're using energy. So electricity is more expensive when demand is high, but renewable generation is low. Some technology can support keeping energy bills affordable, like smart energy heaters that are programmed to turn on when energy is the least expensive, or devices like smart thermostats, which can help customers avoid using energy when it's most expensive. Some utilities, like PG&E, also offer specific rate plans for households that have heat pump space or water heaters, or electric vehicles, which can help with energy rates. Electricity currently is more expensive than gas on a per unit basis. However, zero-emission appliances like heat pumps can be much more efficient. By switching to a heat pump, bills can be reduced. This may not be the case, however, if switching to electric resistance technology, which uses more electricity. And things may look different for folks using propane or wood burning as their main fuel source. Finally, insulation can have a big impact on energy bills, so ensuring buildings are well insulated can help reduce energy costs. Another concern we've heard is what a potential regulation means for renters. We recognize the concern that landlords could pass through the cost of expensive zero-emission equipment onto their tenants. Some jurisdictions, like in LA, do cap these pass-through costs, but most do not. The map on the right shows an inventory of anti-displacement policies in the Bay Area, compiled by the Urban Displacement Project in 2019. CARB has commissioned an update and statewide expansion of this map so the public can see which cities and counties have what kinds of protective policies available. While there are statewide renter protection laws in place, exemptions still exist for substantial retrofits, which may put tenants at risk of losing housing when a major renovation needs to take place. Some incentive programs, like the CEC's Equitable Building Decarbonization Program, offer protections for tenants. So if a landlord accesses that program, they're prohibited from raising rents or evicting their tenants. CARB recognizes the critical need to mitigate the risk that a zero-emission regulation could serve as a basis for a landlord to raise rents or seek to evict their tenants. And with that, I will wrap up the presentation part of the evening. We welcome your feedback and thoughts on any and all of these issues. And now I will pass it to my colleague, Awe, to share some responses to the questions that have come in the Q&A.
Thanks, Maggie. And for those of you who have already submitted questions via the Q&A feature, we'll address any clarifying questions first. We may not be able to get to every question in the queue right now, but we will definitely follow up after the meeting with responses to those questions to those who raised them. Okay, let's start with this first question from Bob. How will these standards differ from CEC appliance efficiency standards? Will these become part of the Cal Green Building Code standards? Kathy, do you want to answer this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Bob. Nice to see you again. Yes, those CEC's building energy standards and Cal Green codes we consider those are complementary policies. We have different authority and different angle of approaching this. So and there's no conflict, and it just we're not rolling into the building codes or Kelvin codes or building energy codes, but it's somewhat different but complementary.
Thanks, Kathy. Our second question from Bob, again, thanks, Bob. Will there be an exemption for those existing dwellings, apartments, and/or single-family dwellings where increased electrical load cannot be handled without an expensive panel upgrade? Emma, I think you'll answer this, and we can tie it to one of the questions we received earlier.
Yeah, thanks, Awe, and thanks, Bob, for this question. We also received a question from one of the workshop registrants along similar lines, sharing this concern about electrical grid capacity being able to handle potential additional load. And as Maggie mentioned in the presentation, we are aware of and looking into this issue and its potential implications for a given household or business's ability to adopt zero-emission equipment, especially in a setting where they weren't anticipating needing to replace and they might need to undertake service upsizing in order to install zero-emission equipment. So we are aware of some of the Air District approaches for allowing for longer timelines to install zero-emission equipment, and our team is exploring the potential need for including such provisions in our own regulations. So thanks so much for raising this topic.
Thanks, Emma. Our next question from Kayla asks, does this apply to industry? Yeah, so the regulation is per specific equipment for different equipment types. And we have the different compliance dates for when each equipment type and its size limit comes into effect. And so that's what our regulation applies to. Our next question is from Kathy, is what is CARB doing to work with unions and to train technicians? Anyone from CARB staff want to take this?
Sure, I
Thanks,
can
Emma.
speak to this. Yeah, and we also received another registrant question asking how CARB is going to be working with contractors and heating and air companies to make purchase and installation as easy as possible. So, the workforce implications of our rule are something that we are exploring and considering. We were fortunate to work with the Construction Trades Workforce Initiative to co-host one of our listening sessions earlier this fall. And we learned a lot about the importance of unions and high road workforce pathways for supporting transition to zero-emission equipment, especially having high-quality labor and high wages to support high-quality installations and minimize long-term maintenance issues like refrigerant leakage. So I'll say that we're currently in a learning mode about the workforce implications and potential implementation needs. This is something that we'll be looking at more closely if the board does approve a regulation and we move into our implementation planning. So we'll have a handful of years if the board decides to move forward with a zero emission standard, where we'll be thinking about all the necessary outreach, building up training capacity, making sure that contractors, unions, the broader workforce is aware of and preparing for all the labor that will be needed to install zero emission appliances. So although I don't have a more specific answer at this time, we are really aware of this issue, and we welcome more detailed suggestions about folks we should be connecting with and things we should be considering as we gear up for that implementation planning work. So thanks so much for including that in tonight's Q&A.
Thanks, Emma. Next, we have a question from Krista. How has CARB staff considered the Bay Area and South Coast air quality districts rules regarding exemption and retrofit language for propane, space, and water heaters? Do we have any CARB staff able to answer this one? Krista, we'll be able to type an answer and get back to you on that shortly. Next, we have a question from Michael. How can these standards become part of the REACH code tiers in CalGreen? The advantage of that is it can create greater consistency in the REACH code landscape where we have over 100 separate REACH codes. Having tiers in CalGreen would also lower the costs and time required for private sector application of REACH codes and public sector administration and enforcement. We answered a bit of these with Emma's response to the other surrounding policies. And so we'll type an answer in the chat for you, Michael. Let's see. Next, we have Kathy. When will the board hearing be on this? I think we had a slide with the timeline, and we'll be going to the board I think towards the end of next year, and someone on CARB staff could clarify that. But we'll answer that oh, go ahead, Emma.
Thanks, Aoi. We don't have the board hearing scheduled yet, but we have been aiming for next year, and there will be ample announcement before that hearing occurs.
Thanks, Emma. Okay. We received questions in other areas also, so let's take a look there. And folks, feel free to keep adding questions to the Q&A using the Q&A feature. We have a question from John Norwood on pool heaters, saying current pool heaters are used primarily to heat in-ground spas. Even the most avid pool spa person may use the spa 30 times a year. It may take an hour to heat the spa. A heat pump water heater would take 6 hours or longer, depending on the climate running on electricity to do the same job. This will drive additional electricity costs for consumers and the grid. Also will set up a situation where consumers will be very unhappy with wait times and increased costs. Do you have any CARB staff want to talk about the role of pool heaters in our regulation?
Hi, this is Melanie. Thanks, John, for your comments and your questions. Certainly, we are exploring the feasibility of all heaters, water heaters, including the spas, and we're continuing to do analysis. And as you know, we have a deeper dive on pool heaters next month. So yeah, we are still doing some research and appreciate your feedback.
Thanks, Melanie, and thanks, John, for the question. We have a question here from Clint. Clint, you're a weatherization provider for low-income homes, and we look at homes to try and see if a heat pump water heater is feasible. In addition to the obvious electrical requirements, we find room to install heat pump water heaters. We find that room to install heat pumps water heaters is a huge problem. Let's see here. A lot of owners of these buildings that low-income residents reside also try to spend the least amount of money possible on those rentals, so they would fall in the same category. Mobile home closets never have enough space. Funding to help create the space necessary in order to install heat pump water heaters would be a great thing. Yes, as mentioned, we have there are tons of incentive programs that are available to help defray the costs of installing all these different equipments. And so, Clint, I hope that answers your question. And Emma, I see that you want to add to it.
Yeah, thanks, Aoi. In addition to what you shared, Clint, appreciate all the detail in your comment here. We are aware of the significant space constraints and are paying attention to the technologies and the innovations that are happening, especially in the mobile and manufactured home space. We've seen some use of additional external closets being built to accommodate water heaters, but those have also run into certain code challenges. So we know that this can be a complex area to handle well. So thanks. Yeah, just wanted to echo the thanks for bringing this topic in.
Thanks, Emma. We have one more question from Brett. How will CARB track the number of conversions to heat pumps and other non-NOx emitting appliances if the new rules are implemented? Yeah, first, our regulation is for greenhouse gas emissions, not targeting NOx emissions. And we are currently working on, we're currently working on how we will develop our tracking method because this happens at the point of sale, and we're tracking it at the manufacturer, how many are being manufactured and being sold. And so we are currently developing that that process. Okay, it is now 6:37. With those questions addressed, we'll now take time to hear from you all in a facilitated discussion. So thank you all for submitting questions, and we'll answer all of them, the remaining questions, any outstanding questions, via email afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Aoi, for helping us with the Q&A, and to everyone here for sharing their questions. It's much appreciated. So we didn't have time to get to everything that was shared in the Q&A, but our team will work on either written responses, or we can weave some of these questions into the discussion in the rest of our agenda for tonight. So thanks again. So now I'll give an overview of how we'll approach the facilitated discussion portion of the agenda. So you can go on ahead to the next slide. So this is structured a little bit differently than our typical public workshop, right? We have this time outside of working hours to hopefully bring in a broader community of folks for whom this regulation isn't necessarily connected to their professional work. And so we have these 5 discussion questions, which are intended to elicit feedback, ideas, anything you wish to share with us around, first, your own experiences with space and water heating equipment replacement, be it as a small business, a homeowner, a renter, or somebody working professionally in this field. The second, ideas around what CARB staff should be bearing in mind as we design a regulation and plan for potential implementation. A lot of the questions we received are already getting at this connection with air district rules and building codes, considerations around whether electric service upsizing is needed. So we welcome your additional thoughts about these dimensions that we should integrate in our regulatory analysis. Third, we'd like to understand what could help make a switch smoother. So this is more so related to our implementation planning, ideas around workforce, training, outreach, other resources that could be supportive. The fourth question will hold space just to hear any comments, reflections that don't fall inside the questions that we've crafted here. We want to be open to whatever feedback you might have for us. And then finally, fifth, we're seeking feedback on our engagement process and who's included so far. So, any event is not going to be a perfect reflection of all the perspectives in the state that we'd like to include, but we're also really curious about any specific recommendations or ideas you have about who we should be reaching out to, and especially how we could include them. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So the format for this discussion over the 5 questions will be with the assistance of a tool called Menti, which I'll give more instructions about how to access on the next slide. Menti will essentially allow us all to add written responses and which we can view collectively. And then the Menti responses will be followed by a verbal comment period. based on that question. So you can use the raise hand feature, which will look like a raised hand in Zoom, or if you click the heart react button, you'll see a raise hand option. Just to allow for broad participation, we will limit these verbal comments to 2 minutes. We'll have an on-screen timer and a very cute musical cue that'll let you know when your time is up. The time for these questions is spaced out for about 5 to 15 minutes each. And then after our facilitated discussion, we'll move into an optional breakout group period. You're encouraged to stay just to continue the conversation more informally with CARB staff, have a chance to come on camera and be in a more free-flowing dialogue with us, and also share further comments there might not have been time to include in the facilitated discussion. So let's go ahead and go over the Menti instructions. So there's a couple ways to join. There's now a link in the chat which you can follow to join from your web browser. If you want to join via smartphone and answer the questions that way, you can simply open your smartphone camera and point it at the QR code on screen. And you can also open your browser, go to menti.com and enter the code 94311428. And that code will stay on screen if for some reason you lose the Menti page. Last night, we had a couple issues with folks being able to access Menti or navigate among the questions. So let me emphasize these instructions. If you don't want to answer a question and just want to skip ahead to the next, you have to submit a blank answer and then hit skip. You can use the back button on your browser to go back to a previous question. And we're also leaving the poll open until an hour after the meeting ends. So if thoughts come to you later on, you can still access the poll till then. Okay, so while folks are getting into Menti, I just want to pause for a moment for the rest of the CARB team who is here to listen tonight to have a chance to introduce themselves. I think starting with Holger.
Hi, good evening. My name is Holger Stoon with CARB, and thank you for being here.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Ballin. I'm with Sacramento State, supporting CARB on these listening sessions.
Hi, everyone. This is Kathy Zhao. Thank you for joining us this evening. Hi, everyone. Melanie Zauscher. I appreciate your time today and looking forward to the discussion.
Hi, my name's Nasim Golestani. It's great to meet you all virtually.
Hey everyone, nice to see everybody. My name is Paul Hernandez, part of the team.
Good evening, I'm Pamela Gupta, also with CARB, and thanks for being here and look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thanks everyone. I think that covers our introduction, so we can go ahead and stop our CARB screen share, and Lisa will share the Menti poll results. So our first couple questions are just getting to know you questions. We're interested in hearing where folks are coming from geographically. So this is the Northern California listening session, but of course, California is really an enormous state. So please go ahead and share the county you live in or the city that you're coming from so we get a little bit of a better sense of where folks are based. So it looks like there's a strong Sacramento contingent here. We see San Jose, Alameda, San Francisco. So a lot of Bay Area counties, also someone here from Butte County. That's great. Okay, so since this one seems to be slowing down, we can go ahead to the next. Just also interested in understanding a little bit more about your professional field of work, whether or not it's directly connected to zero emission standards, what's driving your interest in being here tonight. So yeah, really amazing array of fields here. Energy, environmental policy, residential HVAC, nonprofit, engineering, policy director, someone teaching law, government, weatherization, energy efficiency, utilities, a physician. So a lot of health, environmental, energy, policy, buildings, professionals here tonight. Well, thanks for sharing about your backgrounds. It's really helpful and nice to get a little bit of a stronger sense of who's in the room. So let's go ahead into our first discussion question about your experiences with space and water heating equipment replacement. And wow, there's so many responses already. Thanks so much. So we have an architect with a lot of design experience, design professionals, someone who had an expensive, time-consuming, and frustrating experience, and that's already with ample product stock and multiple energy sources available. Some experiences with local ordinance and utility incentive programs, someone representing the California Pool and Spa Association, pool builders, pool heater manufacturers and distributors. Someone's here who does space and water heating equipment replacement as part of their day-to-day business. That's awesome. I'm sure we have a lot to learn from you. Personal experience getting quotes for heat pump space heating and heat pump water heaters, and the quotes for water heaters were higher than expected. When working on code, programs, policy, residential and commercial. Someone without much experience, they have natural gas space and water heaters in their facility in both manufacturing buildings and also the support and office buildings. So pretty interesting and complex setting that one of the folks here tonight is thinking about. 1 year with a heat pump water heater, self-installed, working well. A neighbor installed a heat pump water heater in their basement, but removed it due to excessive noise throughout the home. Someone who replaced their gas furnace and water heater with a heat pump heating system and an electric water heater. Since they live in a single family home that had pre-existing ductwork, it was easy to install. Someone working on replacing them, testing for carbon monoxide emissions, and zone testing of water heating locations. Overall, excellent experience replacing both space and water heaters last summer. It took some effort to deal with inspections and get rebates. Someone seeing growing program participation in the residential sector, an energy consultant preparing compliance documentation for permitting, someone with experience testing for emissions, repair and replacement, looking at problems with older buildings conforming to current codes, testing duct systems. Someone who didn't know about the heat pump water heater and they went with an electric one, which may not have been wise. They had to add an electrical outlet. Propane space and water heating equipment are some of the most affordable and reliable choices for consumers, especially in rural areas and cold climates. Well, thank you all so much for all of these responses and the really wide array of deep expertise and experience in the field of equipment replacement. And we're really grateful to have so much expertise in the room. So I think it's a good time to turn to adding verbal comments. You know, I read through those a little quickly. So if there's more detail you want to add to something you've written in or comment on what you're seeing in general about these experiences and what you think is important for CARB staff to hear, please do go ahead and raise your hand and we can start hearing from folks. Okay. Hi, Kathy. I see Kathy Carriage with a raised hand. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute. And I think you should
Thanks.
be able. Great.
There are programs existing in the Bay Area. There's especially people active on the peninsula in, promoting space heaters and water heaters, particularly for low-income people. And I hope that CARB has tapped into some of their knowledge. My friends, myself and a couple of friends, we did a little podcast series just called Jumping into Solutions, just to introduce people to the basic concepts of what a heat pump is. Because a lot of people have no clue, and a lot of people don't have any clue that a space heating heat pump is also an air conditioner. So first of all, I think we need to stop calling them heat pumps. I think we need to call them heat cool pumps, because most people in the public have no idea. And CARB really needs to spend money on advertising to start informing the public about what these are, what the advantages are in both terms of air pollution and climate change, and how to go about doing it. Because the big thing is, if you're going to do your whole home, it's really great if you have a plan so that you don't wait till something breaks. So if you've got an old water heater, replace it before it breaks down, because that might be something that's very essential to you. But there's a guy named Tom Cabot on the peninsula who's done a great series of videos. Maybe you've heard about him before. It sounds like you have. CARB really needs to start doing that, but I would love to start seeing more public service messages on TV, on Facebook, on all of these things, just starting to explain the basic concepts. And also, if you just rely upon an electrician to tell you if you need a panel upgrade, they're going to tell you yes, because that's how they make their money. So you mentioned some alternatives at the beginning of your talk about power switching devices and that kind of thing. And I think that that's really necessary.
Thanks so much, Kathy, for all your comments. Yeah, much appreciated. While we're waiting for other raised hands, waiting for other raised hands, I'll just share a couple notes in response, just on the importance of outreach and potential state resources to support more public information. One effort that CARB is excited about and our leadership is participating in is the governor's, the 6 million heat pump, the governor's 6 million heat pump goal, and the CEC's heat pump partnership with a handful of manufacturers that have signed on to commit to help the state realize this 6 million heat pump goal. So a part of that initiative includes designing and developing a marketing campaign that is seeking to improve public awareness. So thanks for raising the importance of that. It is important for us to remember that we need to get the message out to the public. I think especially if a regulation is approved and we're starting to plan for implementation. We're really fortunate to have Tom Cabot as part of our group of public experts who have been
great.
very generously offering their feedback to us CARB staff on our analysis methods. And we had a handful of meetings earlier this year where we presented some more details about our staff analysis for this regulation. And coming up, starting probably early next year, we'll be undertaking a series of implementation planning conversations, taking a lot of the topics that have been raised as part of the listening sessions on our initial staff research, and then asking feedback from these public experts around how CARB should be planning ahead and thinking about a future where regulation would be in place and all the kinds of supports that might be necessary to really make sure the public is ready. So just wanted to mention those two things, and thanks so much for your comment.
Great.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any more hands up on this one. So I think let's go ahead and move on to our second question. What should CARB staff bear in mind as they design a regulation and plan for potential implementation? Yeah, we have a wealth of feedback here, so let me just take a moment to read through and share a couple highlights. So the first I see here, you have not considered disproportionate impacts on middle-class families that are not subsidized by low-income assistance programs. They are caught by price spikes for goods, services, and electricity. Thank you. Second, you have not considered the massive cost of finance to underwrite the appliances themselves, the equipment needed to upgrade electrical infrastructure, nor the finance costs of construction and labor. considering the site-specific constraints in the process, feasibility through many lenses, cost, marketplace, population, personal preferences and requirements, equipment characteristics, including but not limited to size and installation requirements. And then here, third, I think in line with the first two there, third, this will create an additional bump on the duck curve during low supply winter months, driving importation of out-of-state electricity that is dirtier, subject to fewer environmental standards. So yes, winter peaking issues, concerns there, potential federal preemption claims. How does it affect electrical load on the facility? Does it affect existing equipment or only new equipment? Feasibility, technology, costs, and customer satisfaction. Here, propane is not included in air district rules because the original rules that were amended have always been for methane gas burning units. However, propane users will save the most from heat pumps. Align exemptions with air districts, ensure lower income households are connected to EBD or similar programs to minimize installation costs and receive tenant protections. Incentive availability varies widely across the state depending primarily on one's CCA or utility, and additional targeted funding is critical in order for low-income installs at or below cost parity. Implementation will not be affordable, equitable, and successful without CPUC, HCD, and other state and local partners making policy change often on long stagnant issues. CARB needs to drive change. And here it will be a huge lift to get most people most in need educated about these rules and connected to programs to ensure a just transition. It is so important to coordinate work across agencies. Wow, thank you so much for all these comments. It's really kind of a tour of the greatest hits of some of the key issues that we're thinking about and really holding in mind as we're designing the regulation. So thank you so much for just these really detailed and thoughtful comments. Just in response to the first handful that were related to the potential economic impacts of this rule, I wanted to flag that one of the first documents you'll see from our team as we are moving to share some of the more formal regulatory proposal materials with the public will be the standardized regulatory impact assessment, which is a very detailed economic analysis of the proposal and alternatives. This document called the SREA will contain a lot of that detailed economic analysis. And so there'll be information to sign up on the listserv. But for those interested in the way that CARB is thinking about economic impacts, I wanted to flag that document in particular as a resource that you can review and that will be welcoming more detailed public comments on when we reach that phase. I see that Colin, I think your last name is pronounced Sawyers, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong. But so Colin, I want to invite you to please go ahead and come off mute and share your comment verbally. Let me find you in the participant list.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, pretty close. Colin Suarez.
Ah,
so I was the one who was asking those first few questions, and I appreciate the feedback on the SREA. However, time and time again, we've seen what CARB does with SREA is you upfront benefits that are technically only realized over the long-term implementation, and it still assesses cost impact. So it's not an apples to oranges comparison that you're doing as part of these cost estimates. As a matter of fact, with long-term projections of electricity costs continuing to rise and only normalizing based on the last studies we've seen at CEC into the mid-2030s at the earliest, those traditionally have not been accounted for in CARB SREA analyses. So would disagree with you a little bit on that front. Second, the power draws in the 16 climate zones that California has are all fundamentally different. And while there are, yes, cold weather climate zone appropriate heat pumps that you rightly flagged at the beginning, the power draw in each of those in those climate zones based on the environmental demands are substantially different. And an apple is not an apple in each of those 16 climate zones. Again, this is not a one-size-fits-all opportunity. This has to recognize the geographic and environmental differences of California's 16 climate zones. Third, intermittency in some of these climate zones is not just a difficulty, it is a health and safety issue. You were talking about a home that is not heated, potentially imperils the health and safety of those individuals living in it. A heater is not just something that provides comfort, it provides essential health and services And again, that has to be recognized in any rulemaking going forward. And then largely the cost of finance can't be underwritten. The middle class will disproportionately bear a lot of these cost impacts because they don't meet the subsidy tier band of a lot of these programs. So just thinking about going forward, there's a lot of these impacts. Hopefully we can work it out.
Thank you, Colin, for so succinctly laying out so many critical issues. I really, really appreciate your detailed comment. Just a response to your last point on financing just comes to mind immediately, although I think we'll certainly take time to consider the totality of your comment in more detail in the future. I am aware that there's a new financing programs available supported by CATFA, the California Alternative Energy Financing Authority. Perhaps I'll find the correct acronym, and we can share the link to that program in the chat. But they have a new financing program called Go Green California, I believe, which is targeted specifically at those middle income consumers. And the state is signed on to help de-risk these financing options for lenders to support households to get loans to purchase zero emission equipment. So I'm excited about that option as one way to make financing more abundant by de-risking some of those investments for lenders. Thanks, Melanie, for sharing the chat. And if CATFA folks are listening to this recording, I so apologize for forgetting your acronym. Okay, other raised hands on this second comment here? Anything else we should be bearing in mind as we're designing the regulation and planning for potential implementation? Yeah, increased electrical demand on the power grid, what happens during rolling power outages or times of fire in the summer. Yeah, we had the chance to visit some communities in more rural parts of the state that have kind of deal with more intermittency or storms. Fast trip outages will leave folks with multiple days or even weeks without power. We also spoke with folks who are living off grid entirely, and we're learning a lot about the importance of having solutions within a zero emission regulation that ensure that basic needs are still being met. So appreciate your comment to that end, Colin, and all the great feedback here for us to consider. So thank you so much for all this rich feedback on the second question. I'm not seeing any more hands, so why don't we go ahead and oh, let's see, there's one last one coming in here. The line to the house is not big enough. Yes. Yeah, as Maggie flagged in the slide on distribution infrastructure, we are pretty deferential to the Public Utilities Commission in terms of their initiatives to deal with issues around energization timelines and cost to ratepayers. So thank you for bringing this in, and we'll continue to stay abreast of the work happening at the CPUC. We are confident that those teams understand the challenges related to decarbonization and are working in earnest to identify potential solutions. So thanks for bringing all the grid related comments in here. It's very important for us to see and helpful. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to our third question. What could help make a switch to zero emission space and water heating smoother for you, your neighbors, and your communities? Comments here around incentives, making permits easier to obtain, vetting installers with clear guarantees, having a resource for answers to specific questions that's well vetted and authoritative, knowing the timeline considering older buildings and infrastructures considering the addition to the power grid, providing me with a guarantee that having a singular source of energy into my home that could be cut off at a moment's notice won't skyrocket in price in the future. If all costs associated with increased utility service, as in new transmission distribution lines, were paid by the utility, not the customer. Outreach to end user on how heat pumps work, far different than gas for maximum efficiency and comfort. Do not try to force a square peg into a round hole. Use real cost to consumers, not wishful thinking. Extensive contractor training and outreach so they are aware of incentives, requirements, etc. Contractors are the front lines and will be the primary implementers of this rule. Group purchasing that would reduce costs. Can CARB help do that? Good questions here. Please coordinate with other state agencies and legislature. Do not make everyday people do this. Great. Well, thank you so much for all the great comments coming in. Lisa, would you mind scrolling back up to the top here? Yeah, I had some, just the here around the resource for answers to specific questions echoes a lot of what we've heard at other listening sessions around having more of a roadmap of resources and specific actions or recommendations. So that point is well taken. I think around some of the comments here about real world costs or the importance of thinking more realistically from the perspective of different conditions. Part of the analysis work we'll be doing includes detailed case studies. So if anyone on this call has more detailed information they'd like to share with us about their own experience or their clients, we're really receptive to getting more real world project costs. The tech program data is one of the most abundant sources of real world project costs, but of course those projects are all occurring within the context of that incentive program. So if folks are willing to and interested to share more details about their specific experiences, we'll gratefully receive more information from you. I don't have an answer on this group purchasing question. I don't think it's very commonplace for the state to finance that kind of effort when it comes to new technology adoption. But it does make me curious what the Equitable Building Decarb Program administrators will do and how they might approach contracts to bulk procure equipment in administering direct install programs. So we can maybe bring this question to incentive program staff or others in the state who might have more information. So yeah, again, I'll welcome anybody who'd like to expand on something they've written or share a comment inspired by what they see on screen around this question of what could help make a switch to zero emission space and water heating equipment smoother. So please go ahead and raise your hand if you're interested in verbally contributing to the conversation. While we're waiting for hands, I'll just flag that my team has addressed the outstanding questions in the Q&A. So you can take a look at those responses here. One clarifying point, thanks Jennifer Kennedy for that clarification. It's only available in some areas. It's no longer statewide effective this Friday. So thank you for that update. Okay, I'm not seeing any more, any raised hands on this question. So why don't we go ahead to question number 4? So our open-ended question, what else would you like to share with CARB staff? We have here a comment, California has a REACH code landscape that includes over 100 individual codes created and maintained at great cost. The complexity of this landscape for implementation and enforcement is daunting. Consideration for the increased electrical load and consideration of existing equipment in older infrastructure. The arrogance of thinking that the real logistical cost and implementation challenges of touching every home in California can be hand-waved away is stunning, even for CARB. The pro-housing program has had success with the PR value coupled with some financial incentives to drive participation. Thank you for these comments. And yeah, particularly, just acknowledging the concern about our thinking related to logistics and cost and implementation challenges. Part of the way we're trying to approach the critical importance of applying every strategy possible to achieve our state's climate goals is having these conversations and hearing from a diverse array of perspectives around what you think about these approaches. And so even feedback where it's critical of the agency is welcome. I'm curious if the commenter with what looks like extensive experience in the REACH code landscape and the cost for creating and maintaining and implementing these codes might be interested in coming off mute to expand on their comments and share some of their expertise with us about how REACH codes might intersect with our potential zero emission standards. Okay, there's a couple more written comments here. One mentioning that heat pumps are already outselling furnaces in the US, and the highest penetration of heat pumps in the world are Norway, Sweden, and Finland. A comment here to make things as simple as possible. That replacement should happen as current equipment needs to be replaced, and they expect equipment will get cheaper and better as the regs are put in place. A commenter here saying, we are in a climate crisis and methane must go. So really warmly encourage anyone who wants to jump into the conversation verbally. We do have time to hear your thoughts out loud. Just really appreciate all the perspectives in the room and encourage you to feel very welcome to share. There's a question popping up here around how will the cost of the new requirement be handled? Will it be put back on the renter, each individual owning or renting a property? How will this affect the middle class specifically? So I can try to get at some of this. We're anticipating that the building owner would typically be the one to pay for any costs associated with equipment replacement. As Maggie mentioned, this rule is related to new equipment purchases. So in a future under this regulation, it's perfectly allowable for anybody to continue to pay for repairing or maintaining existing equipment, especially if that's the most cost-effective way to retain access to water heating or space heating. That's perfectly fine under the future regulation. In terms of whether it would be put back on the renter, that depends on each landlord. In cities like Los Angeles, they're some cities will have adopted pass-through cost restrictions that limit the amount a landlord can put capital expenses in the building back into the rents that they charge. Also, rent stabilization ordinances will establish yearly percentage increase limits, so that'll depend on the building owner and the local policies in place. And in terms of how it'll affect the middle class specifically, some of the analysis we'll be doing in connection with this regulation will be exploring that question. We're looking at equipment costs, so the incremental costs, like relative to a baseline or non-compliant equipment replacement, how much additional might someone pay for a zero-emission equipment? And then also, what's the potential retrofit costs associated with their building? And then our aim is to look at the distribution of incomes in the state and try to estimate some of the affordability implications. So how much of the typical annual income across different income bands would the expenses associated with complying with a regulation constitute? And we see this as a really important aspect of thinking about the equity dimensions of a potential regulation. So we don't have a concrete answer now, but that is an area we'll be exploring in our analysis. I see one more comment coming in here. The decrease in emissions will have immense health benefits in addition to climate benefits immediately and will help us phase out methane leakage, which has the greatest immediate climate benefits. Another comment, we are in an inflation and cost of living crisis with staggering consequences for the middle class and folks on fixed incomes. All of the climate change changes are an additional regressive tax. Thank you for these comments. I'm just really hearing these big themes emerging around the importance of addressing the climate crisis and phasing out methane leakage, methane combustion, and avoiding additional methane leakage. And at the same time, just in the high cost of living in the state, inflation, the importance of really thinking about the economic impacts of a potential regulation. Just really acknowledging those perspectives that are here. Thank you. Can CARB start doing columns for newspapers or put on Facebook and Nextdoor to start spreading the word? Just short pieces with basic explanation and then get info about rebates. Thank you for that comment. I think, you know, just an initial response at this time, our staff, you know, our small but mighty team is really focused on the analysis work, thinking about what the regulatory language would look like. We're so grateful for all of the partners, nonprofit organizations and CBOs who do this kind of public education and outreach work. Kathy mentioned a podcast earlier that they've done, which we'll have to check out. So the sort of public outreach work, in addition to the listening sessions and workshops, would probably really ramp up once a regulation, if the board approved a regulation. But thank you for pointing that out. Engaging tenant, equity, and environmental justice organizations directly to share the regulation, get feedback, and shape the regulation to protect vulnerable communities and build support. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. We are really grateful to have the opportunity to meet with environmental justice organizations. We're Strategic Action for a Just Economy is one of the public experts that has done a lot of research on renovictions, where a landlord has used building renovations as a pretext for evicting their tenants, and has provided a lot of critical information to us about the displacement issues related to potential building retrofits, and ideas about how CARB, other agencies in the legislature might respond to them. So we are certainly trying our best to learn from these groups and consult with them as we're developing a regulation. A comment here, we're starting to see how expensive the climate crisis is with insurance rate increases. Nothing costs more than replacing your home and all of your belongings lost in that fire, flood, or hurricane. Yes, Regulations at point of sale is critical for statewide climate goals and for equipment conversions in existing buildings. Importance of state action to accelerate the market, bring costs down, and ensure that all households can benefit from zero-emission equipment and prepare for longer-term escalation of gas costs. Well, thank you for all the comments here. Even though folks weren't chiming in verbally, I feel that I was in a deep conversation with all of you in the room. Oh, there's one more here. The Switches On is a good site for incentive information for customers. Great. Well, just keeping an eye on the time, why don't we move on to our fifth and final question in the structured discussion portion for this evening. And that's what or who is missing from the conversation? How can we include them? So industry, all of the rental properties in the area, all contractors working in the Bay Area on HVAC, contractors who specialize in zero-emission installs. Most people who would be impacted by such regulations do not have time or inclination to attend workshops or programs. Summaries and concepts should be available in short format, online, updated often. Middle-class families and those outside of the subsidy bracket for government programs, and the people who will actually have to install all of these things. Yes. Residents from environmental justice communities, AB 617 working groups, and public health experts. Thank you so much for this wide range of suggestions, and all very well taken. Yeah, pointing out some really, really critical parts of our public that we need to think about engaging. Thank you. Would anyone like to raise a hand to share more verbally in response to what you see written here, or more generally? And then there's one more coming in here. Since I don't know who is here, that's difficult to answer. Fair enough. We need to hear from low-income people, technicians, and people who don't know what a heat pump is. Yes, so, you know, we have had, I'll say that contractors in particular are a group that we are really hoping to engage more deeply with. There were a handful of folks at our workforce focused listening session, as well as some, not at every, but I think a small handful of our other in-person listening sessions who had more of that direct experience. And I totally agree. I learned so much from talking with folks who are really working on the ground. One here, including local agencies with responsibility for building permits. They're a critical touch point to support the regulation. Without local touch points, there's a risk for out-of-state markets and resale of old equipment. Great. So I'm sensing perhaps folks would prefer to continue the conversation verbally in our breakout rooms. So not seeing any more coming in. Need to go to groups and speak, for example, at conventions. Yeah, thank you for that suggestion. We do attend conferences from time to time, most often in more of a listening role or perhaps moderating a discussion. But we are really open to suggestions about venues where you'd recommend we should share updates about a potential regulation to receive more feedback. So any more specific suggestions around industry associations or other groups that we might reach out to better engage the groups mentioned here? We really appreciate your suggestions and feedback. I feel so grateful for the really detailed and thorough comments and all the engagement in the written portion of our facilitated discussion tonight. I'll go ahead and ask Holger to start sharing our slides once more so I can provide an overview of how the breakout discussions will work. So you can go on ahead to the next slide. Okay, great. So we now have about 30 minutes for our breakout discussions. Oh, I think one moment, please. While we're getting the slides back up, I can just explain verbally. We'll have about 30 minutes for our breakout room discussions. This will include one CARB staff person as a facilitator and one as a note taker. Depending on how many breakouts we have, there might be more staff there with you. Can go back one slide, Holger. Thanks. Sorry about the PowerPoint crash. So the breakout rooms are a space for you to share any further thoughts you have on the discussion questions or other things on your mind as you're here at the listening session this evening. If you don't wish to participate, feel free to leave the meeting. For those staying for the breakout rooms, they'll end by 8 o'clock and we won't come back to this main room. On the next slide, you'll see a QR code and we'll also share a link to a feedback form about the listening session in the chat. Really appreciate your filling out that feedback form just to provide information to us about your experience tonight and suggestions for our future engagement work. We really do look at your feedback and wish to always improve our process for engaging the public. So I think Maggie has been working hard behind the scenes to get our breakout rooms set up. The last thing I'll mention, if anyone is wishing to participate in the breakout room in Spanish, we'll make sure that you're assigned to breakout room 2 so you can hang back in the main room and not follow the breakout room assignment so we can get you assigned accordingly. So I'll go ahead and turn off our interpretation, I think. Not sure if I'm actually able to turn it off if I'm still meeting host. Here we go. Okay, we should now be ready to go into the breakout rooms. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
And Emma, if you could join